federal government is out with a warning tonight against traveling to Mexico. This comes just days after 2 Americans were killed after crossing into the country. We'll have more on the travel warning in just a moment. But first, a powerful Mexican drug cartel has allegedly taken responsibility for the killings of those 2 Americans. Here's ABC's Derek Dennis.
A dramatic image out of Matamoros, Mexico. 5 men found tied up near a pickup truck in the same area where the abduction of 4 Americans took place. A handwritten note on the truck's windshield claiming to be from the Gulf Cartel, saying, "We have decided to deliver those involved and directly responsible."
It's not of any surprise that they are under a lot of pressure to put this behind them and try to distance themselves as best they can.
The abduction on March 3rd was caught on camera. 4 days later, after an urgent search, Latavia McGee and Eric James Williams were found alive inside this wooden shack outside of town. The bodies of their friends, Shaid Woodard and Zindel Brown, found at the same location. Their remains were returned to the U.S. overnight.
He was my baby, you know, and for him to be taken from me like that, it was very, very hurtful.
Multiple Mexican law enforcement sources tell ABC News the cartel note is believed to be legitimate, but neither ABC News nor U.S. officials have been able to verify the authenticity of the letter. Senator Lindsey Graham says he plans to introduce new legislation to fight these cartels.
Drug cartels in Mexico have been terrorizing Americans for decades. We're going to destroy their business model and their lifestyle because our national security and the security of the United States as a whole depends on us taking decisive action.
Due to the ongoing threat of violence in Mexico, the Texas Department of Public Safety is warning against traveling Mexico during spring break. In a statement, Texas DPS Director Stephen McCraw says, quote, "Drug cartel violence and other criminal activity represent a significant safety threat to anyone who crosses into Mexico right now. We have a duty to inform the public about safety, travel risks, and threats based on the volatile nature of the cartel activity and the violence we are seeing there. We are urging individuals to avoid travel to Mexico at this time." The U.S. State Department is echoing that warning. 6 Mexican states there are under the highest level of the threat warning. Emma Lockhart has more on the warning ahead of when many are going on spring break.
Mexico is a popular spring break destination known for its beautiful beaches and culture. But tonight, a new travel warning from the State Department might make you think twice about traveling there.
The U.S. government, their main priority is to keep U.S. citizens safe. So that's what they're trying to do. And when you cross that jurisdiction into another country, you lose a lot of those safety measures.
There are 6 states right now under the highest level travel advisory. U.S. officials say do not travel there. The orange states are under a level 3 advisory, meaning you should reconsider travel.
So you've got cartel violence in multiple states. The most restrictive travel warnings from the United States government are mostly indicative of that cartel violence in those regions.
Other regions that are home to popular vacation spots like Cabo and Cancun are under a Travel 2 advisory. That means you should use increased caution. Lance Lessing is a retired special agent with the FBI. He says it's important to listen to these warnings. And if you still plan to go south of the border,
you can't drink in excess and not be aware of your surroundings. You can't travel to areas that you're unsure of. Just don't put yourself in those situations to become a target.
He says do your research and stay in areas you're familiar with.
If you're going to a tourist area that's relatively safe, stay in those tourist areas. Stay on the resorts. Stay in the places that you know. If you're accepting rides or rideshare companies, make sure that's reputable. Make sure you know who that is. Maybe hire a driver that the hotel recommends or the resort recommends. Don't go off the grid or off the beaten path.
U.S. citizens who do decide to travel to Mexico are urged to register with the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate prior to their departure. For more on this, open your phone's camera and scan the QR code at the bottom of your screen, or go to our website, kltv.com, and click on the big red box. Well,